But I'm Kareem Parsons. I'm an assistant professor of creative writing in the English department. And it really is such a privilege to be able to gather with you all in person. I kind of forgotten how to do this. Sorry, Kareem, how to host people. It's all coming back to me slowly but surely. But really glad to have you all here today. Thank you so much for being here despite the cold. And thank you especially to our guest, Kareem James Abu-Zeid, who has flown here from New Mexico to be with us. I'd also like to thank the groups who made this talk possible through generous funding: the Richard Thomas Chair of Creative Writing, the English Department, Modern Languages and Literature, and the Kenyon Review. The Kenyon Review is doing a hybrid reading right now for us, so this is being shown to people all over the place. Thank you so much to Elizabeth Dark and her interns for making that happen. And huge thanks also to Carla Parsons, the English Department admin, for help in smoothly coordinating logistics when travel seems anything but smooth. A glance at Kareem's website reveals his sterling credentials: PhD in Conflict from Berkeley, BA from Princeton, and a long list of prestigious awards, including the Penn Translation Award and the National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship. But instead of rattling off more of those here, I thought I would share a bit about what makes Kareem an extraordinary person, and which is what in turn has helped him become a singular artist. I've known Kareem for more than 20 years now. For a brief time in the late 20th century and early 21st, the olden days, our paths crossed at university. We were in the same residential college and frequently ran into each other in the dining hall. We had both grown up in the Gulf, he in Kuwait and I in Saudi Arabia, and we're both interested in the Middle East. I wish I could say that we took that common ground and built a close friendship on it, but alas, we ran in different circles and didn't spend a lot of time hanging out. In fact, I don't think I've seen Kareem since we both left campus in 2003. But over the years, our shared creative professions and love of Arabic literature have brought us closer. We've traded emails and one or two phone calls, cheered each other's successes, and talked through the inevitable struggles and vagaries of a literary life. The remarkable thing about Kareem is that his generous heart, joyous spirit, and creative mind penetrate even that most restrictive and muddled textual realm, that of electronic mail. Perhaps it is Kareem's long-standing dedication to meditation that allows him to thwart basic laws of physics, to seem in quotidian correspondence carried out over vast distances, somehow as vital, embodied, and present as if you were in the room with you. So although we haven't seen each other in many years, I feel as if today I'm welcoming to Kenyon an old and very dear friend to share his art with us. Please join me to celebrate the staggeringly talented and superlatively lovely Kareem James Abu-Zeid.
Hi, everyone. So first, thanks so much, Kayla, for the very, very nice introduction. And thanks to the Kenyon Review and the English Department, and Modern Languages, and Creative Writing, all the sponsors for making this happen. And I'll echo the thanks to Carla Parsons and to Elizabeth and everyone helping with the sound and stuff. So today, I'm going to focus sort of less on the craft of translation, which is often what I wind up talking about at things like these, and instead focus more on the text themselves. So I'll let the translations kind of speak for themselves today. But I'm happy to answer questions about the translation process if people have any after the talk in the Q&A, or the reading, I should call it. And so we're going to begin by kind of taking a journey back in time, about 1,500 years ago, give or take, to pre-Islamic Arabic poetry, and specifically to a group of poems that are called the Mu'allaqat, often translated as the hanging poems. And these are kind of the first texts that we know of. They were, or some of the first anyway, they were written down well over a century after they were first composed. So there's this debates about the veracity. Obviously, when texts are transmitted orally for that long, you can never be quite sure if what was written down was actually what they were singing. But these were, it's a group of 7, the hanging poems, a group of 7 to 9 texts, depending on the compiler. And they were considered the finest poetry in pre-Islamic Arabia. So this is just shortly before the advent of Islam, so late 6th century, early 7th century CE. And they're called the hanging poems because they were, supposedly, the legend is, they were so good, the finest ones were hung from the sacred stone of the Kaaba in Mecca. And this was the earliest photo of Mecca that I could find. The Kaaba was a pagan sort of site of pilgrimage before it was taken on by Islam. So that gives you a sense of where the poems, legend has it, were originally hung up. Now that legend could very well be apocryphal, but it's still there in the cultural imaginary. So I like to bring it in. And that's obviously why they're called the hanging poems. Now they have a lot of different themes. They're very varied. They talk about tribal wars. They talk about sort of, there's some that are supernatural. There's others that are sort of aphoristic, wisdom pieces, all kinds of stuff in these 10 very long poems. And I'm going to just read part of the hanging poem of a guy named Imrul Qais. And his text is considered the very first of these. He's kind of considered the first Arab poet. So this would be late 6th century. He was born, maybe even mid 6th century. He was born sometime around 526 AD. And back then, the poets were kind of spokespeople of the tribes. So his father was a tribal king of the Kinda tribe in the Arabian Peninsula. And let me come up with a map there. Somewhere over there on this, there you see Kinda, right over there by Hejaz, in the middle of the Arabian Peninsula. So that was roughly where his father ruled. And I'll talk a little bit about his father in a moment. So again, his text is considered the first of these. If you're going to take a history of Arabic literature course, this is where you'd start. You'd be starting with Imrul Qais and with what I'm reading right now, or what I will be reading. And so probably the closest thing we might have in English would be maybe Beowulf, though this is obviously a lot older. So I'm going to recite just the first 3 verses of the Arabic so you can hear it. It's strong rhyme, strong rhythm. You'll hear it because obviously these were memorized. So these are just 3 verses. Each verse is 2 hemistichs. And his poem is very long. It goes on for, I think, about 100 verses, if I remember correctly. So which translates to quite a lot of poetry. So here it is in the Arabic, in little case. And then I will read the beginning of the English. كفى نبكي من ذكرى حبيب ومنزل بسكت اللوى بين الدخول فحوملي فتودح المكرات لم يعفو رسمها لما نسجتها من جنوب وشمال ترى بعر الأرام في عرصاتها وكيانها كأنه حب فلفل. So hopefully you can hear a little bit of that there. Now, this is the beginning of the English. I'm going to read 3 small sections from 3 sections, 2 shorter, 1 longer. And this is the very beginning. And I'm trying to make more of an accessible translation. I find when it's 13, 14, 15 pages of poetry without a break, it's not very accessible. So I've given, there's very clear sections in the Arabic. So even though it's just one long text. So I'm giving each one a title in the English. And this one is, this beginning opening is called Remembering a Lover. And this is kind of became a very standard opening for poetry in the pre-Islamic and then later on the classical Umayyad and Abbasid period. A lot of poetry begins with poets looking at the vestiges or ruins of campsite, remembering his beloved and the sort of bygone days there. So this is called, this is the Mu'allaqah in the case, Remembering a Lover. Stop and let us weep, remembering a lover and a campsite where the sands twist between the Hul and Halva. The whipping winds from north and south have yet to efface Tudeh or Nekrat, and you can see the scat of antelopes strewn like peppercorns all across the sands. When the time comes to set out again, my friends start loading up their steeds by the tribe's acacias, but I feel like I'm splitting bitter colocynth. Hold firm, my companions say. Don't give in to sorrow. My cure, a river of tears, but no place brings solace now that every trace of her is gone. And before her I shed such tears for Huwayrith and for Huwayrith's neighbor, Rabab, in Maqsal. Whenever those two women rose to leave me, musk filled my nostrils like an easterly breeze that bears the scent of cloves. The tears run down my neck, soaking my scabbard with an ardent love. So that's the beginning there. Now, I mentioned that he was a prince. He was a prince, but his father was killed. And there's a lot of legends about his life. He's kind of a bad boy figure, a little bit like, maybe like Rambo or someone in the Western traditions. But his father was killed, and he went from being a prince to, according to the legend, basically a vagabond in the desert, having to raid other tribes for food, and relying on other tribes for shelter as he attempted to avenge his father's life. And it earned him sort of his most famous nickname, which was Al-Malak al-Dalil, which is something like the vagabond king, or the wandering king, or the lost king. And there's all sorts of legends. I encourage you to look up his life, because there's a lot of good stories. They even, to give you a sense here, this was a TV show that was made in Jordan a couple of decades ago. I couldn't find the actual show, but the poster is good. Right? So gives you just a sense of his importance as a cultural figure. Everyone knows him both place in the Arab world. So I mention that because this next section, called the Wolf, very short, is almost certainly from the period after his father had been killed. There's a distinct difference in tone between those two kind of periods. One where he was presumably living in a bit more opulence, and the other. And so this is called The Wolf. You can find it was published by Poetry Magazine earlier this year, so you can find it online. The Wolf. How many times have I set forth with a bent back and a water skin slung on my shoulder? How many valleys have I crossed, lands barren as an ass's belly, where the wolf howls in its dire need? Once when I heard that howl, I offered a reply. We are hard up, you and I, brothers in destitution. Whatever we lay hold of, we soon let slip away. Times are always lean for those who sow like us. So that's the wolf. I'm going to read one more, slightly longer section. This is called The Horse. And there's a very rich tradition, very long tradition of hunting poetry in Arabic literature that stretches on for centuries. And so this is one of the earliest, probably the earliest text where we have an example of that. And many critics say the horse is Imrul Qais himself. He was a very boastful poet, very always boasting about the women he was with, the battles he won, his prowess in battle, all of this stuff. So this is a good example of that, and a beautiful example of hunting poetry. The Horse. Often I've risen at first light, the birds still in their nests, with my horse, his hair trim, his massive body ready to hunt the wild game. How quickly he moves, charging forward and drawing back as in a single motion, poised to rush down from on high like a torrent of stones. His hue, the dark of wine. His back, so slick, the saddle felt slips from it like raindrops off rock. He's fierce, though lean, and the sound he makes when he sets off is like a seething cauldron. Quick and smooth as flowing water, his hooves barely touch the earth, while the other steeds stumble and kick up dust. The light young rider slips from his back. The robes of the heavy-set rider who hangs on hard are flung to the wind. He's that quick, like the spinning top that children whirl with sturdy thread. He's got the lithesome flanks of a gazelle, the forceful legs of an ostrich, the wolf's potent stride, the sudden spring of a fleet-footed fox. And when he leaves you in his wake, you'll see his flawless tail, so thick it fills the space between his legs, so long it almost touches earth. And when he stands by the tent, his back is as smooth as the pounding stone for a bride's perfume, as strong as the stone for pungent colocynth. On his mane, the blood of the swiftest game, the foremost of the herd, looks like henna's dark juice on a head of clean white hair. A herd appears, like those virgin women with trailing robes who circle the idol of Dawar. The cows drag their tails behind them. Turning to flee, they look like the white shells and dark jewels strung together on the neck of a boy with noble kinsmen respected by the tribe. My steed brings us swiftly to the leaders, while far behind him, the straggling cattle, not scattering, huddle together. Bringing down both bull and cow in a single movement, he never breaks a sweat. Soon the busy cooks will tend the meat. They'll roast some slowly over open flames. They'll quickly boil the rest. When we come back to the grateful tribe, the people stare, awestruck by his beauty. He spends the night with bit and saddle still firmly on. No willful roaming here, loyal, disciplined. He never strays too far from it. So that's Emerald Place. I'm going to stop there. That's probably about half the poem, maybe a little bit less, maybe a third of it, of the whole one. And we're going to jump forward in time to Adonis, skipping several time periods here, just because I'm just focusing on what I've translated. So we're jumping into the second half of the 20th century. Adonis was born Ali Ahmed Said in Syria, 1930, still writing, still very, very active. He is considered kind of one of the masters of Arabic modernist poetry when in the 50s and 60s, sort of the poetry began breaking free from a lot of the classical forms. And he wasn't the first to break free by any means. That had already started in the 40s. But many people consider him kind of the summit of that movement. And in particular, this work, Songs of Mihyar Damascus, which was 1960 to 61, published in 1961, is considered kind of the high point, I would say, of that movement and kind of the definitive break with more classical Arabic poetics. And this was a book that I co-translated with Ivan Eubanks. Was only published in 2019, but it was actually the first book-length translation project I ever worked on. Just took a long time to get published. And so New Directions published it in 2019, and then Penguin Classics published it this year in the UK. And so this is kind of considered the seminal work. Very long, about 200 pages of poetry. Not always an easy read, but it's very impressive in Arabic. And I'm just going to read a couple poems from it to give you a little taste of what it's like. And I'm going to read the first one in Arabic and then in English, because there's almost like a incantational quality in Arabic. The rhymes are very strong. The rhythms are very strong, even though he's manipulating and breaking with the classical Arabic poetic forms. So the collection centers on this figure, Mihyar the Damascus, who takes on all these different kind of poetic forebears. He becomes Muhammad, he becomes Noah, he becomes Jesus, Gilgamesh, all these different figures. But each time the legend is kind of rewritten a little bit through him. So Jesus isn't quite Jesus. Noah is very different. Noah is telling God, no, I don't want the ark, all these things. So I'll read one from the very beginning. This is in English, it's called Mihyar is King. Oh, I meant to plug this as well. I did write a book on Adonis that was just published this year, focusing more on the spiritual aspect of his writing. So that's that right there. So Malakun Mihyar, Mihyar is King. Malakun Mihyar, Malakun wa khulmu lahu kasrun wa hada'akun nar. واليوم شكاك بالكلمات صوت مات ملك المحيار يحيا في ملكوت الريح ويملك في أرض الأسرار. hopefully you can hear that, the rhyme and the rhythm. Mihyar is king. Mihyar is king, a king who dreams of a palace and gardens of fire. Today, a voice deceased challenged him before the word. Mihyar is king. He dwells in the realm of wind and rules a land of mysteries. The next poem from there is called A Voice. A lot of poems called A Voice in this collection. Mihyar, a face betrayed by those he loves. Mihyar, a silent bell. Mihyar is written on our faces, a song that stealthily visits us on white paths of exile. A gone Mihyar among the wanderers in this Galilean land. And so a lot of the collection, it's really, that book is really one sort of long poem, can be read like that. So a lot of it's about each poem refers back to others and becomes something new in the mind. I'm going to read one that's a little bit more accessible, I think. This is called Elegy for Haraj. And Mansur al-Haraj was a very famous sort of proto-Sufi mystic who was murdered in Baghdad back in 922 AD. And he would have these mystic visions, and then poetry and other texts would come out of it. He had a lot of political enemies, so which may also have been why he was murdered. But at least ostensibly, the reason he was killed was he said in Arabic, "Ana al-Haq," I am the truth, and the truth was one of the names of God, and this was considered blasphemous. So likely it was an excuse that his political enemies kind of used to get rid of him. The accounts are correct. His death was pretty gruesome, unfortunately. And this is an interesting poem because Adonis wrote these 1960, 61, but that it started to read very differently and feel very differently after the Iraq War had begun. So it's interesting sometimes how texts just transform based on the political realities of our day. Elegy for Haraj. Your poisonous green plume, your plume whose veins swell with flames, raging like the star rising from Baghdad, is our history and coming resurrection in our land, in our death reborn. Time lies in your hands, and the raging fire in your eyes spreads to the heavens. Star rising from Baghdad, laden with poetry and birth, poisonous green plume. Nothing remains in this land of resurrection for those coming from afar with echoes, ice, and death. Nothing remains in this flayed land but you and presence, Galilean tongue of thunder, poet of secrets and roots. So that's Adonis. A few poems from that collection are up on Poetry Magazine. Also, you can get those online, a couple of them anyway. We're going to jump now to more contemporary. There's one Darwish, Palestinian poet. I'm always asked, so it's no relationship to Mahmoud Darwish, who was kind of the standard bearer of Palestinian poetry in the 20th century. Najwan was born in 1978 in Jerusalem. We have two books in English that I translated. First one is Nothing More to Lose, 2014, NYRB Poets. And then this year, a new one came out, Exhausted on the Cross, with a foreword by the Chilean poet Raul Zurita. And I'm going to read a bit from those two collections and one or two that we haven't published yet in book form anyway. And his poetry is extremely varied. There's all sorts of different themes. There's humor sometimes. Sometimes it's very direct politically. Often it's not. And I just love his work, which is why he's actually the first poet to have two books in the NYRB Poet series. So I'm going to start with one that is called We Never Stop. This was actually not from one of these two books, but it was published by the Cordite Review in Australia. So, we never stop. I have no country to return to, no country to be banished from. a tree whose roots are a running river. It dies if it stops. It dies if it doesn't. On the cheeks and arms of death, I spent the best of my days. And the land I lost each day, I gained each day anew. The people had a single country, but mine multiplied in loss, renewed itself in absence. Its roots, like mine, are water. If it stops, it withers. If it stops, it dies. Both of us are running with a river of sunbeams, a river of gold dust that rises from ancient wounds, and we never stop. We keep on, never thinking to pause, so our two paths can meet. I have no country to be banished from, no country to return to. I'll die if I stop. I'll die if I keep going. Next poem is called Because of a Woman. It's from the new book, Exhausted on the Cross. I came to this city because of a casual date with a woman, and now 7 years have gone by. And I crossed the bridge to that other city because of a date with a woman. It too was casual. Everywhere I've gone was because of a woman. And despite all my hollow claims that women are disloyal, my guide was always a woman. A woman gave birth to me, and a woman grabbed my fingers and started writing. And she's still writing, even after her death. Every house I've ever lived in was built by a woman, or owned by a woman, or lost by a woman. My country's a woman, and this mother goddess whose streets I drag a cross through is also a woman. And in a past life, when my corpse lay out in the open and they forbade them to bury me, it was a woman who emerged from the shadows to lay me in the earth. When no one believed me, a woman believed. And because of a woman, I lived life to the fullest. It's regrettable that only men will carry my coffin this time around. Next poem, short one, The Beating Rain. You wake to the rain beating on the sea, your home a ship with roots that grew into the harbor. The rain pounds the sea, waterfalls creep over the mountain's back. The sky is a piece of gray. The sea's head is heavy, and it, like you, wants a cup of coffee. This next poem, we move into the art section of the reading. When I put this reading together, I realized somehow I picked up several different poems that dealt with art in different ways on the tail end. So this poem is called Liberty, and it references this painting by Eugène Delacroix, the French painter. This is commemorating the 1830 July Revolution in France, which overthrew King Charles X. And the painting was drawn in 1830, so very, very contemporary. But one thing I should note was that Nejwan wrote this poem in 2012. It's a short poem, as you'll see. And it was about 1 year after the Syrian war had started. What was originally called the Syrian uprising, I believe, and now people call it the Syrian civil war. And it was at about this point that I think people were starting to realize that it wasn't going to be a quick war or a quick uprising. So that's what this poem is. That was what inspired this poem. Liberty. Liberty leading the people has two bare breasts. Her right hand holds the French flag, her left a rifle with a bayonet. But notice too how barefoot liberty tramples the people beneath her. There's a lot of dark humor in some of Nejwan's poetry. I like this one a lot. It's called Phobia. The title in Arabic is also Phobia. All right. Phobia. I'll be banished from the city before night falls. They'll claim I neglected to pay for the air. I'll be banished from the city before the advent of evening. They'll claim I paid no rent for the sun, nor any fees for the clouds. I'll be banished from the city before the sun rises. They'll say I gave night grief and failed to lift my praises to the stars. I'll be banished from the city before I've even left the womb, because all I did for 7 months was write poems and wait to be. I'll be banished from being because I'm partial to the void. I'll be banished from the void for my suspect ties to being. I'll be banished from both being and the void because I was born of becoming. I'll be banished. So this next poem is called Nadia Ali. It was written about Nadia Ali, who was a major figure in Palestine, across the Arab world, really. He was a very famous cartoonist, wrote political cartoons. The cartoons were critical of everyone, pretty much, except, I would say, the people, but certainly critical of aspects of the Palestinian government, critical of Israel, critical of America. He was murdered in 1987. The case was recently reopened by the British police, I think. I still don't think they were determined. But the Israeli Mossad and the PLO in Palestine were both suspected of being involved in the murder. Just want to give you a quick example, too, of his cartoons. This part right here says, the Sabra and Shatila refugee camps in Lebanon. Those are for peace, bringing morsels of bread to the children. And then that one over there says, kak, which is they're little round cakes. Some of them actually look like rings and have a hole in the middle, not all of them. So it says the Eid cake, kak, the Eid. And there it is. And this little figure became very famous. His name is Hamdal. Naji started putting Hamdal in all of his works. And after a couple of years, he turned Hamdal around and said, Hamdal will never show his face again until the Arab people have achieved dignity. And he never turned around. And he remained 10 years old, always, never grew up, because the Nadia Ali, the author, was 10 years old when he was exiled, when he lost his country. So he was born in 38, and 48 was not exiled. 48 was when he lost his home. So that's to give you a sense of him. Nadia Ali. Whenever we achieve a victory, one of those small ones the world does not think of as victories, I bring you to mind, not knowing what it is that floods my eyes. And whenever we are defeated, as we often are these days, no one but you places a hand on my shoulder. I'm going to read one more from Najwan. This one is called A Short Story About the Closing of the Sea. When you turn down that street at the city's edge, the one that leads to the camp, if you see children leaving that school that resembles a prison, if you see 7 of them standing there on the threshold of silence and watching, if you see a slender child whose eyes are gleaming with all the world's promises, you'll have found my friend Taisir. His family has a country that was stolen in broad daylight, and you can see the vigilance of its birds in his anxious eyes. The cement houses, the memories of tin sheets, the voices that were fearful of the occupying army's transceivers through the long weeks of curfew. None of this has taken the slightest spark from his eyes. He saw the sea once, and nothing can convince him he won't see it again. When the curfew's lifted, we'll take you to the sea. That's how they used to comfort him. And when the curfew finally was lifted one evening, they said, the sea's closed now. Go to sleep. He didn't sleep that night. He imagined an old man who closed the sea by lowering a massive tin sheet that stretched from the star on the horizon to the sand on the shore. The man secured it with a huge padlock, then went back to his home. The padlock was larger than the one on Taisir's father's shop on Omar Mukhtar Street. When you walk down that street at the city's edge, the one that leads to the camp, if you see two eyes gleaming with all the world's promises, ask them, I beg you, if the Gaza Sea has opened yet, or if it's still closed. Actually, I lied. I've got one last poem from Najwan, so it doesn't end too dark. And this one is called The First Hour. It's short, so I'll read the Arabic. الساعة الأولى قد من حلب أم موشح من الأندلس أم عتابا من قرية محجرة هي ما سيعود المريضة في الساعة الأولى من السنة الجديدة. هذه حيفا مرح يديها لله في الدين لا تقل لها وداع أنت من يستعيدها الآن وكل أوان آمين. The First Hour, a song from Aleppo, or a poem from Andalusia, or a tune from a village whose people were expelled. What will visit the sick man in the New Year's first hour? This is Haifa, the joy of God's hands in clay. Don't say goodbye to her. It's you who brings her back, now and forever. Amen. So for the last few minutes, I'm going to read from the poetry of Olivia Elias. This is a work in progress, though we're pretty much done with the book. She was born, one second. She was born in 1944 in Haifa, which we just read about. And her family was exiled to Lebanon in 1948. And she lost her Arabic and French schooling in Lebanon. And then in her teens, she made her way to Quebec, Canada. And now she lives in France and writes in French. So this book is called Chaos Crossing and Other Poems. It's coming out at World Poetry Books next year, 2022. And so she writes in French. She's part of a large number of sort of poets and writers of the Palestinian diaspora who kind of identify as Palestinian, but grew up in other places and write in other languages. Many of them in English. Good examples of poets would be Nadia Ali and Naomi Shihab Nye. So this will be Olivia's first book in English. She started writing quite late in life, which is somewhat rare. Her first book, I think, came out in, I want to say 2017, 2016. So the first poem, I'm going to read, I think, three or four short ones. It's called Barca Nostra. And Barca Nostra was a kind of controversial art exhibit from the Venice Biennale a couple of years ago. It was a fishing boat that was transporting somewhere between 700 and 1,100 migrants across the Mediterranean Sea. And the artist acquired the wreckage of the boat and used it as the exhibit. And all of those migrants died, as far as we know. The artist's name is Christoph Bucher. He's Swiss Icelandic. So this poem is called Barca Nostra. I'll read the French just so you can hear it, and then read the English. Barca Nostra, 19 décembre 2019. Le résultat scolaire épinglé sur la poitrine, ne les ont pas sauvés. Passeport dérisoire, tout juste bons à faire des boulettes de papier. Des pipés, côtes éornées, ce monde n'est pas la maison. fermer la frontière blanche aux enfants du chalutier mouillé. Les mots s'absentent, ne veulent que prier et s'incliner devant les enfants, tomber au champ d'honneur de la lutte pour la vie belle, avec comme décoration posthume le résultat scolaire épinglé sur la poitrine, nuit après nuit en mer Méditerranée, au milieu d'une nappe de fleurs funéraires de papier, une barque air et sombre. Ce monde n'est pas leur maison. Fermez la frontière blanche. Barca Nostra, 19 December 2019. Their report cards pinned to their chests will not have saved them. Pathetic passports, barely good enough to make paper balls. Loaded dice, error message. This world is not their home. The white border closed to the children of the rusty trawler. The words are absent, only want to pray and bow down before the fallen children in the field of honor of the struggle for a good life. Their report cards pinned to their chest, posthumous decorations, night after night in the Mediterranean Sea, in the middle of a tablecloth of paper funeral flowers. A boat wanders off course and sinks. This world is not their home. Forever closed the white border. So this next poem is called Offering. Oh, I should have said, you can read Barca Nostra in Poetry London, the summer edition of this year. It's online. And this next poem I'm going to read is called Offering. It's references a hunger strike. And in 2017, June 2017, about 1,700 Palestinian political prisoners went on hunger strike. These are just two of the prisons that they were at. And they went on strike just to sort of have some of their most basic rights met. And sort of 40 days in, which is when she wrote this, 800 of them were still refusing to eat. So, offering, hunger strike, 40th day. Your bodies flutter on the ceiling of the room. I can see your slow gestures, the small bones in the joints of your hands, your eyes where the night rises. I must cross the pain again. Listen to your heart that's growing weaker and weaker. Witness this madness, the body devouring itself, your last offering to freedom. Around you, the barking of the jailers and their dogs, while your life goes just like that, sacrificed to their senseless dream of conquest. And I'll read two more very short poems to end the reading, and we can do some Q&A. Another one about the migrants in the Mediterranean. It's called Call. 18 years old, the sea for horizon. For so long dreaming of unfurling his foliage, taking stock of his steps. And just as the earth cannot contain the sap each spring, the call keeps growing. 18 years old, the sea for horizon. Finally, to obey the command, roll the dice and cross the liquid wall. And then I'll read one last one. It's called Such Slow Birth. Olivia practices meditation like me, so we connect on that level. And she actually has a lot of poems that are, I think, sort of informed by those experiences. And so this poem references alternate title of the Tao Te Ching, which is the Book of the Way and its virtue. Such slow birth. Two cycles intersect. Cycle of twilight deepening toward the black moon. Cycle of transformations ripen. I opened the Book of the Way and its virtue. To attain complete emptiness is to settle firmly in rest. A child, I had this knowledge and didn't know how precious it was, handed down by village elders, sitting on their doorsteps, surrounded by beauty. They offered their faces like old cats in the sun. time now to drag my chair out in front of the door. Thank you very much. So if there's any questions, feel free.
I'll just note, Olivia is with us
Okay.
virtually, and she says, great, Kareem is such an excellent translator.
Oh. Thanks, Olivia. Nice to see you. Sorry if I faced away from the camera. I think I forgot it was there a little bit. It's been so long since I've been reading in front of people. Yes.
In some of the 6th century poems you read earlier in the reading, I was surprised at how easily they, I mean, this is kind of, I guess you, but like how similarly they translated into English grammatically. And I was wondering how much of that was you and how much of that is like the language itself mirroring.
Okay, so could everyone hear the question? Okay, so most of it was me, I would say. I guess there'd be different ways to approach a project like that. I'm translating all of those poems, and it's always tricky because the context is so foreign, and then the language is also very different. The language is difficult even for for Arabic readers because it's so old. But I'm trying to make it kind of a fluid, flowing, accessible translation. And so I would say I'm translating a lot of the context as well, in addition to the words. So on that, in that section I read, there was something like, the poet is mourning the loss of his beloved. And he says something like, I feel like I'm splitting bitter colocynth. So I added, for example, bitter, because colocynth was known as a very bitter kind of medicinal gourd, looks a bit like a squash. And so for me, that was important. In the Arabic, the word is hambal, which is, it kind of sticks in your throat a bit. And in fact, that was the name of that little kid from the cartoons. His name is Hambal also. Not for that reason, but because, though it may have something to do with bitterness, but presumably because the roots are very strong. And if you cut the plant, it will grow back. So that was presumably why he named the child Hambal. So I try to translate a lot of the context. There's a lot of place names in that opening section. Nobody really knew where the place names were, but there's other parts of the poem where there's commentary that says this was an oasis known for its, for the richness of, for its beauty and how green it was. So I might put that in there in the poem to give that context. Or if it's a mountain, I'll specify that it's a mountain, right? Rather than just leaving it blank, which would be, I think, quite difficult in English to start to. So I try to think, well, what would someone had heard this 15 years ago, what would they be hearing? Like, what would they know? And I try to put as much of that in as I can without going too far from the text. So, and then I was very free with the translation. I did not, the meaning is all there, but I didn't stick to the sentence structure. Arabic sentence structure is totally different and much more fluid than English. So it has case endings, so you can, especially with poetry, you can kind of put any word anywhere you want. It doesn't have to be a specific sentence order with poetry. And the poets were famous for, there's even a saying that, to the poets is permitted what is not permitted to others, something like that in Arabic. So, yeah, hope that starts to answer it. Yeah.
So I have like a more technical question, but the one thing that's very common, especially with like the classical Arabic poetry, is the idea of like rhythm, the use of like the short vowels. I don't know the English word for it, but like a before as well.
Yeah.
So I don't know what it means in English, but yeah.
The meters, the different poetic meters.
The poetic meters, yeah. So like while translating it, also Arabic has a very high context language. So like to change one word in Arabic, you will find more in English. So how does this come as a priority when translating?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. It always depends on the project and the context. So, with the pre-Islamic stuff, I'm doing a pretty free verse translation. I'm not trying to keep a consistent meter in English. I'm trying to do a pretty modern translation, I would say. With the Adonis project, the Adonis, it came in a little bit more. It was important to have some stronger, but there's no way to replicate an Arabic meter in English. So I just try to maybe capture a similar feel. And if I lose something, then I'll try to compensate for it with something else, if that makes sense. So you lose a lot of rhyme, but maybe you can use assonance or consonants or different effects in English because I don't think, like the Adonis book, it felt, it was a very modern, it still is in many ways, even though it's quite old, 50 years old now. There's a modern feel to it. Certainly there was when it came out, but like end rhyme does not feel modern to me in English poetry anymore. So when we were translating that, my co-translator Ivan Eubanks and I, we decided against using strong end rhyme, but we did try to kind of make up for it with other sort of sound effects, if that makes sense. And rhythm is always a tricky one, but again, I taught a workshop earlier today here, and one of the things we talked about is always reading the translations out loud and also the original text out loud, particularly with poetry, because that can really help. And every now and then, it doesn't always happen like this. Every now and then there'll be a poem where the English suddenly has the same rhythm as the Arabic. It's rare, I'll say that, and it sort of happens by accident when it happens, but it does happen sometimes. So. Yeah, yes, first you and then.
You're translating the work of the living author. What is the process of collaboration with that person?
Okay, it's a good question. For those who didn't hear, what's the process of collaboration with a living author? Most of the authors I translated are living, so it really depends on the author. I've translated a few, almost all the authors I've translated are alive, with the exception of this pre-Islamic project. So Najwan and I work very closely together. He has excellent English. He'll often, he gives me feedback on the translations. We go back and forth. So we have I'd say pretty close. I mean, he's not a native speaker of English, but we have a close and friendly working relationship, and we work well together. So that's an example of where it works. I work with other people where we haven't worked that well together, and so we'll not work too closely. Olivia and I worked very closely on her poetry, and still are. And then other authors don't really want to be that involved, so that's fine too. Adonis, basically, I met with him once with a big list of questions that I had, stuff that was unclear to me, and he answered all those. But that was kind of the extent of it with him. And it was like that with a novelist that I translated, Abu-Zeid, or he would just answer my questions by email, and he just sort of let me do the rest. So it really depends on the author, I would say. There's not one. I don't have a formula that I use, really. You had a question, I believe? Or?
Yeah, it was a question about the intersection between the oral and the written. So you're performing class orally, and of course you're publishing all these books. And so I guess I have 3 observations. So one is it was so wonderful to hear you speak the Arabic and also the French. I found myself wondering with the translations, with the French, somehow expected the English to sound different because now it was coming from the French, which of course is crazy, but it was interesting. And then finally, with the very early poem, there was this character, Mihayar, or something like that.
Yeah.
And I would have mispronounced that in the English with the wrong number of syllables.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything that can be done about that? Are we moving towards more recordings in order to capture that, or is that something that you're interested in?
Oh, it's a good question. And names are going to be mispronounced, so there's not. I think actually in the book, in the back, in the notes for the Adonis, I do think I actually tell people how to pronounce Mihyar, because I go into the etymology of the name and what it means. I just gave a very, very quick introduction. That's a very complex work. The book actually has a great sort of contextual introduction by a professor from Yale, Robin Cresswell, which helps. And then I put a lot of notes in the back to help the reader out a little bit. But I don't know if there's much you can do about that. Unfortunately, it's the same thing as will be with the pre-Islamic. I could always put, it's a good point, I could put sort of diacritical marks like a line above certain vowels to indicate that it's a long vowel, something like that. Maybe I should think about that. I just always feel it distracts a little bit with weird symbols like that in the text. So I haven't done it really because I'm a believer that the translator shouldn't, or the translation shouldn't call too much attention to itself. Does that make sense? Like, I kind of want people to be able to read it and forget that they're reading a translation because it works so well in English, you know? So that's what I try to do, but I guess some of that stuff, I suppose, gets sort of slips between the cracks then. Was there another question in there? I can't remember. No, hopefully that starts to answer it anyway. Might not be very satisfying. Yes.
So I should preface this question by saying that I'm referencing a review of Exhausted on the Cross that a friend of mine, Hannah Ibrahim, published in the Kenyan Collegiate, or the Kenyan Review.
Yes. Yeah.
But so something that she noted in that short review was in one poem in Exhausted in the Cross, that you kept the word, I believe, fadayin, and you did not translate it. So I was wondering, not just with that specific example, but when do you feel like a word maybe cannot or should not be translated?
That's a really good question. I don't think I have a principle about that. It's always kind of case by case. I don't do it too often, honestly. In novels, maybe with food, things like that are very specific that just don't. And even with the food, I'll often gloss it. I'll put in the Arabic word, then I'll have a very short description in the English of what it is. And then after that, I'll just use the Arabic, right? Because I've explained it. That one poem, I believe the line was, Christ was a fada'i, in English, fada'i, just like you. And you know, I looked up the word it's in the Merriam-Webster dictionary. I think I italicized it. The meaning is a bit different because we think of fada'i, fada'i just became a thing during the Intifada and meant something like, you know, maybe freedom fighters, though in the West it was often equated with terrorists, right? So it was a loaded word, but in Arabic, it means one who's like a sacrifice, one who sacrifices themselves. So it's not an aggressive term at all. And in that instance, it felt so political, and so it just felt important to keep it in that one instance. I don't do that a lot, really. But that was a moment where I felt like, boy, that's a strong, in English, I felt like that was really strong. Christ was a fada'i, just like you. And so I kept it in there in some ways, maybe hoping people would even go to the dictionary and look it up. And you know, I usually use Merriam-Webster as the standard for American English. So it does, thankfully, they do mention the etymology and that it comes from the word meaning sacrifice. For that, you know, it's like a sacrificial lamb. So, but it's case by case. It really depends. And I probably do it less than a lot of translators do it. Because I'm usually going for more readability. And again, like I said, not wanting to sort of call out, like, here I am, I'm a translation. You know, I'm always happy when there's a review that doesn't reference the translation, which happens sometimes. A lot of translators don't like that. But I think it's good because for me, it's like, wow, you know, you read this and you know, it was good enough you forgot that it was a translation. So in those cases, I'm like, okay, I did my job. I did my job pretty well when that happens. But you know, again, there's different philosophies with this. It's just mine. So. Anything else? Or thank you very much for coming. I really appreciate it. It's nice to be able to share. It's been a long time since I've read it in person. So even with a mask, I hope you can understand most of it. And, thanks very much. And thanks again, Kay, and thanks everyone. And,